Case 1. Michelle Shelly. Michael, 2005, Monongalia County. Jimmy Michael ended his last day believing everything at home was steady. He worked hard, cared for those he loved, and trusted the woman he promised his life to. His friends knew him as dependable. A man who showed up, did the right thing, and tried to build something real. He dreamed of a home full of peace, laughter, and the future he and Shelly had planned years earlier. He had no idea how far she had drifted from that dream, or that his greatest danger lived under the same roof. Shelly had always been the bright one in the room, a former cheerleader who moved into nursing, known for her confidence and charm. She carried herself like someone who had her life together, someone who wanted to be seen as a devoted wife, a strong professional, and a loyal friend. But those who looked closer, much closer, would later learn that she lived two different lives, one for the public, one for herself. The marriage had started with hope, a young couple trying to build something stable. In the beginning, they enjoyed quiet nights, weekend plans, and simple comfort. But over time, small cracks formed. At first, nothing loud, nothing dramatic. Just a slow drift, a missed call, a cold response, an argument that ended without explanation. Jimmy didn't know she had already given her attention to someone else, someone she should never have been close to in the first place. Her affair with her best friend's husband had changed her completely. Secret messages, calls she couldn't explain, a connection that pushed her further away from her marriage and deeper into a life built on lies. It wasn't just infatuation. It was control. She wanted a future where she didn't have to answer to anyone, not Jimmy, not her friends, not the truth. And once the affair became something she could no longer hide, she didn't pull back. She fed it. Love can cover many things, but greed always comes through. Jimmy didn't know what she was planning. He didn't know that her work as a nurse gave her access to things most people never see outside a hospital. He didn't know she had already made a choice to remove him, completely and permanently. To her, he was no longer a husband, he was an obstacle. Back then, the warning signs were there. Her growing distance, her sudden coldness, her excuses for late shifts, the way she brushed off questions. Jimmy felt something slipping, but he didn't want to believe his marriage was collapsing. He held on to the hope that things would settle if he stayed patient. But patience couldn't fix something she had already decided to walk away from. On October 29, 2005, the final plan moved into place. The house in Morgantown sat still that evening, quiet on the outside. But inside, a decision had already taken shape. Shelly brought home a paralytic drug, one meant only for controlled medical use. Something meant to keep a patient still during procedures. In the wrong hands, it didn't just still the body, it silenced it. Jimmy didn't feel anything at first. The drug moved quickly, taking his breath before he understood what was happening. He couldn't speak. He couldn't call for help. He couldn't defend himself. He wasn't even able to show fear. He was awake, trapped, locked inside his own body while the woman he trusted watched the life drain from him. And then she set the home on fire. She wanted the scene to look like an accident, a tragic house fire, something people would talk about with sadness, shaking their heads at the loss of a young husband who had done nothing but try to build a good life. Flames spread through the house as she walked away from the man she had vowed to love. In her mind, it would all appear as fate, A terrible moment no one could blame her for. When the fire department arrived, it looked like a household disaster. Burned walls, collapsed beams, smoke-stained rooms. But something about the scene didn't sit right with first responders. There was too much gasoline spread in spots that didn't make sense. Too many pieces that looked placed rather than natural. And Jimmy's body, something about it didn't match what firefighters usually saw. Shelly acted heartbroken. She cried in front of friends. She told everyone how shocked she was. She told investigators that Jimmy must have started the fire by accident. She hoped her tears, not truth, would carry her story. She even tried to claim insurance money. Standing there in grief she had practiced, not felt. But grief can be imitated. Evidence cannot. The autopsy told a story she never expected. Jimmy had no smoke in his lungs. That meant he wasn't breathing when the fire started. Fire didn't kill him. Something else did. And once doctors looked closer, they found it. Rocuronium, a paralytic drug Shelly had access to through her job. A substance with no reason to be in his body unless someone placed it there. Investigators dug deeper. They traced her movements that night. They checked her work access. They pulled phone records, which exposed the affair she was hiding. They found her deleted messages and reconstructed conversations that revealed the emotional distance she tried so hard to hide. The truth was no longer buried under ashes. It was right there, clear and sharp. Detectives confronted her with the facts. She cried again. She tried to explain again. She tried to reshape her story again. But her words no longer carried weight. Every shift in her story only exposed the control she thought she had. And each discovery pushed her closer to the truth she tried to escape. By the time the case reached the courtroom, the story of Shelly Michael was no longer about a tragic fire or a heartbreaking accident. It was about a wife who planned her husband's final night, poisoned him, and then burned their home to erase her tracks. She cried in front of the jury, but her tears didn't change the evidence. Her affair was laid out in plain view. The drug, the timing, the staged fire, the access only she possessed. Witnesses described her double life. Co-workers explained how she could obtain medical drugs. Friends described her detachment from the marriage. Everything that once lived in hidden corners of her life was now out in the open. When the verdict came, she collapsed in her seat. No amount of tears could hide what she had done. The court handed down a life sentence for murder and arson. No parole, no second chance, no new start with the man she had betrayed her best friend for. Her future was sealed the moment she chose to end Jimmy's. His family spoke of the trust he gave her, the safety he believed he had, the pain left behind by a loss no court could mend. They talked about a man who worked hard, loved deeply, and never imagined his life would end inside the home he was trying to build into something stable. Shelly entered Lakin Correctional Center with the life she created through lies and quiet decisions. Behind those walls, she remains a reminder that deception always leads somewhere, often much further than the person expected. She stays out of trouble. She says little. She keeps to herself, claiming remorse when asked, though no interview has ever shown the truth behind her words. Jimmy never got to rebuild his marriage. He never saw the truth coming. But the truth still reached the courtroom, and justice carried his voice where he no longer could. The money she thought she'd receive? Gone. The freedom she chased? Gone. The fantasy of a life with her lover? Gone. She traded everything for a plan she thought no one would question. And in the end, she faced the one thing she never planned for: the truth. Case 2. Natalie Cochran, 2019, Raleigh County. Before the lies, before the money, before the needles and the trips to Florida, Natalie Cochran looked like a woman who had her life in order. A pharmacist, a wife, a mother, someone who appeared steady on the outside, balancing a family and a growing business. People trusted her. Patients came to her for help. Friends believed she was honest. Her husband, Michael, believed she was the one person he could rely on. Michael wasn't a man of suspicions. He worked hard, stayed loyal, and gave his family the life he hoped would keep them safe. He supported their joint business and believed in Natalie's ideas. He never imagined she was carrying secrets that reached far into their finances and into lives outside their home. He didn't see the cracks forming around him because he was too busy trying to keep their life moving forward. Their marriage started with hope, like many do. Two young people building something together. They had children, shared responsibilities, and pursued goals that kept them busy and hopeful for the future. But somewhere between the trust and the day-to-day routine, Natalie created a second world. A world made of false business contracts, investors she lied to, in a Ponzi scheme that pulled in over $2 million. She lived as if she could keep everything afloat forever. Michael sensed stress, but he didn't know the truth behind it. He saw her late nights, her secretive decisions, her quick excuses about money. He felt financial strain without understanding why it was happening. When he asked questions, she brushed them aside. She kept him in the dark about the investors she misled and about the people who were beginning to question where their money had gone. Love can cover many things, but greed always comes through. By early 2019, everything around her business was slipping. Investors wanted answers. People were calling. Payments were overdue. Documents she forged were starting to fall apart under scrutiny. The person closest to her, the man who trusted her the most, began to see that something was wrong. Michael didn't know she'd already crossed into dangerous territory. He didn't know she had borrowed insulin from a neighbor. He didn't know she blamed cancer-like symptoms for needing it. He didn't know she was preparing for something that had nothing to do with illness and everything to do with fear. Fear of losing her scheme. Fear of exposure. Fear of facing him once he found out the truth. The red flags were there, the secrecy, the sudden money problems, the canceled trips, the shifting attitude inside their home, the heavy silence between them. Looking back, the signs were clear, but Michael trusted her. He believed she was overwhelmed, not deceitful. On February 5th, 2019, he went to bed unaware that his life was about to end. He didn't know that the woman he shared everything with would take a vial meant for medical care and use it for harm. He didn't know she had already decided that the only way out of her collapsing world was to remove the one person who could expose it. While he slept, she injected him with insulin he didn't need. There was no struggle, no warning, no moment to call for help. Hours later, he fell into a hypoglycemic crisis, slipping into a coma that doctors couldn't reverse. He stayed in that coma for days. Natalie played the part of a worried wife at his side, pretending she didn't understand why her healthy husband was failing. Michael died on February 11th. To everyone around her, it looked like a medical mystery, a sudden illness, a tragic decline. Natalie cried. She hugged friends. She spoke softly about how shocking the whole thing was. She acted broken, but beneath the tears, she moved with purpose. She canceled his upcoming flight through a text message she sent herself. She continued handling money from her scheme. She acted as if nothing tied her to the very act that took his life. And days after burying him, she drove to Florida telling people she needed space and time to think. She was already planning her next steps, not grieving the man she lost. But lies always leave trails. Investigators noticed gaps. Friends remembered her asking for insulin for illness. The neighbor recalled bringing a vial over at her request. Her explanations didn't match, and the flight cancellation drew suspicion. Why would he suddenly skip travel plans when he had looked forward to the trip? The puzzle pieces didn't connect, and detectives saw it. His body was exhumed. Tests showed insulin he never would have used, with a C-peptide level that proved the injection came from outside his body. That single test tore apart her story. Her Ponzi scheme also collapsed at the same time. Investors spoke out. Bank records surfaced. Paperwork she forged was exposed. Her entire financial world fell open in front of investigators. Nothing she built had a solid foundation, and the moment one piece cracked, the entire tower dropped. She had been living two lives. Now both stood in plain sight. The deeper investigators went, the clearer her plan appeared. Her fear wasn't illness. It wasn't an accident. It was exposure. Once Michael started asking the right questions, she panicked. Instead of facing consequences or telling the truth, she ended the life of the man who trusted her the most. In court, Natalie broke into tears when the verdict was read, but the room stayed still. Her tears didn't cover the lies. They didn't reverse the messages she deleted or the money she took. They didn't soften the recordings that showed her scheme was never real. Every step she took after the murder pointed toward guilt, not grief. Her defense tried to claim the insulin was accidental. They tried to shift blame toward Michael, suggesting he took part in her business or knew more than he appeared to. But the evidence crushed every attempt to shift the story. The jury saw everything clearly. They returned with their decision. Life in prison with no mercy, no chance at parole, no chance at rebuilding the life she destroyed. Her fraud charges added years, stacking on top of the sentence she earned the moment she chose to end her husband's life. Michael's mother sat in court and said it had been a long time coming. Years passed before they learned what truly happened. Years of confusion. Years of believing the worst thing that happened was illness. Now they knew the truth, something far harder to accept. Today, Natalie is serving time in a federal facility, carrying both her fraud sentence and her state life sentence. She has filed appeals, all denied. She keeps a low profile. She hasn't given interviews. She hasn't shown remorse beyond the moments where she thought emotion might help her. Michael never got answers from her in life. But the truth still reached the courtroom. She wanted money. She wanted freedom. She wanted a life without accountability. And in the end, she received something she never prepared for: a future behind bars with no way out. Case 3. Jessica Diane Gordon, 2017, Cabell County. The marriage between Jessica Diane Gordon and her husband Christopher Gordon didn't fall apart overnight. It broke slowly, argument by argument, year by year, until the home on Cavalier Drive no longer felt like a place where love lived. People who knew them said the couple had been together for years, long enough to build routines and responsibilities, long enough to wear each other down, and long enough for small disagreements to grow into battles neither of them knew how to stop. Jessica was 33, an ordinary Huntington resident with no dramatic past on record. Nothing about her stood out to neighbors. She was simply another wife trying to manage a household. But inside their home, she carried a need for control that kept tightening as the marriage grew more strained. Those who knew the couple said she had a way of dominating arguments, pushing conversations into corners, and escalating tension when things didn't go her way. Her husband, Christopher Gordon, was 31. He worked a stable local job, didn't pick fights, and tried to keep peace even when their arguments turned loud. His family described him as non-confrontational, a man who didn't raise his hands, didn't threaten, and didn't want trouble. He loved his family. He wanted stability. He wanted a home where the fighting would finally stop. But as the years went on, that hope faded, and still he stayed. He tried. He believed the relationship could survive if they both found a way to calm the storms that kept rising between them. Love can hold a home together for a while, but control always pushes the foundation apart. The red flags were there long before anything violent happened. Police had been called for disputes in the past. Nothing brutal, nothing explosive, just arguments that grew too tense, too sharp, too constant. Friends said the couple seemed on the brink for months, maybe even longer. No infidelity, no major financial crisis, just years of emotional stress and a power imbalance that never resolved. Looking back, the signs were clear. Too much pressure, too little peace, and two people who no longer knew how to talk without hurting each other. Then came the night of October 22nd, 2017. The argument started like many of their past conflicts. Sharp words, raised voices, old frustrations resurfacing. But something shifted. Jessica wasn't just angry, she felt threatened. Not physically, but emotionally. Their marriage had reached a point where any disagreement felt like an attack, and she reacted with the same force every time. This time she walked to the home safe. Inside was a loaded pistol. Christopher didn't rush her. He didn't threaten her. He didn't charge at her. There was no struggle, no defensive wounds, no sign of a physical fight. He didn't even have a weapon. Investigators later said the scene looked frozen, like the moment happened fast without warning. Standing only a short distance from him, Jessica raised the gun and fired a single shot. It struck Christopher in the head. He died almost instantly. The home that had echoed with years of arguments fell silent for the last time. Her next move was the same one many spouses use when they know the truth is too heavy to stand on. She called 911 and claimed self-defense. Her voice was frantic. She insisted Christopher had scared her. She said the argument pushed her to fear for her life. She leaned fully into the story of a woman forced to protect herself, but nothing in that room supported her claim. No overturned furniture, no bruises, no scratching, no defensive wounds, no marks on her at all. Forensics revealed an execution-style gunshot, close range, deliberate placement, no movement from the victim. If there had been a fight, the evidence would have shown it. Instead, investigators found calm surroundings, a man who didn't have time to react, and a shot fired with precision. The contradictions piled up fast. Detectives saw through her story within hours. the lack of struggle, the single direct wound, the angle and closeness of the shot. Her claim that she feared for her life didn't match anything in the home that night. Neighbors heard the gunshot, but no signs of chaos. Christopher didn't shout for help. There was no crash, no scuffling, no sign he ever believed he was in danger. Jessica's story had holes she couldn't patch. When the case moved into the court system, she cried often. She apologized. She told the judge and the family that she wished things could be different. But those tears didn't erase the evidence. Her lawyers pushed a self-defense narrative. They argued she felt overwhelmed. They argued the marriage had been volatile for years. They argued she believed she had no choice. But emotional exhaustion is not the same as physical threat, and the scene at Cavalier Drive showed no trace of anything that would justify deadly force. Christopher's family attended every hearing, holding on to each other, listening to every detail of how their son died. When the moment came for Jessica to face them in court, she cried softly and whispered, "I know," when Christopher's mother confronted her. But remorse, after the fact, could not refill the empty seat her actions created. Instead of risking a trial with a likely harsher outcome, Jessica entered a Kennedy plea, accepting a second-degree murder conviction without admitting guilt, while acknowledging that the evidence would likely convict her. The agreed sentence was 25 years, the maximum allowable under that plea. The judge ordered her immediate transfer to prison, making it clear the severity of the act and the years of strain that led up to it did not excuse the final decision she made in that bedroom. The courtroom felt heavy as she was taken away, a long, painful chapter, closing for one family and beginning for another. Christopher's family expressed their hurt openly. They spoke about the trouble the marriage caused. They spoke about how hard he tried to keep the home together. They spoke about the future he never got to see, all because a moment of anger was met with a gun instead of a pause. Jessica remains in a West Virginia state prison today. She serves her sentence quietly, kept at a medium security level. She has not caused issues behind bars. She attempted to withdraw her plea in 2023, but the court refused. Every record shows she still carries the remorse she expressed in court, though remorse cannot change the truth of what happened. Christopher Gordon is remembered by his family as a gentle, non-confrontational man who wanted peace more than anything. He didn't deserve the ending he received. And the justice delivered in that courtroom stands as the only voice he has left. Justice can't erase the pain, but it ensures the truth is not forgotten. Case 4. Carly Reed, 2019, Barber County. In relationships built on love, trust is everything. And once that trust breaks, the emotional damage can grow faster than either person can control. For Carly Reed and her husband, Marcus Alva Foggins, their young marriage shifted from passion to hostility in what felt like no time at all. The change didn't happen quietly. It came with arguments, accusations, and two people who couldn't keep the peace, no matter how hard they tried. Carly was only 23. She worked at the FBI facility nearby and lived in Moatsville, carrying herself like someone who was focused, disciplined, and trying to build a life with purpose. To neighbors, she appeared to be a young professional wife with a promising future. But beneath that surface was a woman battling deep jealousy, insecurity, and emotional swings that moved her from affection to rage without warning. The marriage she shared with Marcus was strained from the start, caught between genuine love and constant conflict. Marcus was 26, a state corrections officer, a steady job, steady hands, steady goals. He was outgoing, family-oriented, and ready to move on from the marriage. Their relationship had become too heavy, too hard, too chaotic. He wanted to start fresh, build a new life, and step out of the pain that had taken over their home. But one thing complicated everything. He had been involved with someone else, and that single truth became the center of every fight that followed. He wanted a separation. He was ready for a divorce, but Carly couldn't accept it. Love can hold two people together for a season, but jealousy can destroy everything in seconds. Their marriage had begun as a hopeful union, young, passionate, full of plans. But that didn't last. Accusations filled the air. They argued about messages on his phone. They argued about late nights. They argued about loyalty and betrayal. And slowly, the warmth that once filled their relationship disappeared. Police were called on more than one occasion. Reports described a mutually abusive dynamic, shouting threats, tears, and two people caught in a cycle they couldn't break. Some said Carly suffered emotional abuse. Others said she was the aggressor. The truth lived somewhere in the middle. Two broken people trying to hold on to something already slipping through their hands. Looking back, the red flags were everywhere. Their marriage had become a storm, and neither knew how to step out of it. August 15th, 2019, began like any other day in their home. Nothing dramatic, nothing explosive. But inside their bedroom that night, while Marcus slept, Carly's emotions shifted. The weight of betrayal, the upcoming divorce, the fear of being left, the anger she carried, sharp, heavy, unresolved, rose to the surface. Marcus had no idea what she was thinking. He lay in bed asleep after another long shift, unaware that his wife was only steps away, with thoughts racing beyond repair. While he slept, Carly reached for his Glock pistol, the one he kept in the nightstand. Investigators later said he never woke. There was no movement, no struggle, no attempt to get up or defend himself. He was resting, vulnerable, unaware of the danger standing at his bedside. Carly raised the gun and fired a single shot to his head. The death was immediate. The quiet of their home turned into a moment that changed everything. The person Marcus trusted, the woman he built a life with, ended it with a single decision made in the dark. Moments later, Carly called 911. Her voice shook. She told dispatchers it was an accident. She said the gun went off during a struggle. She said something had gone wrong. But the second officers entered the scene. Nothing in that room aligned with her words. No signs of a fight. No injuries on her. No defensive wounds on Marcus. No overturned furniture. No trail of chaos that comes with the kind of struggle she described. His body was exactly where he had been sleeping. And while first responders were still inside the room, Carly did something that made detectives freeze in place. She grabbed Marcus's phone and began searching through messages, looking for proof of the affair. Even in that moment, seconds after he died, she was consumed by jealousy. It was one of the clearest indicators that her actions were driven by rage, not fear. Investigators examined the evidence. The gunshot was intentional. The angle matched someone standing over a sleeping person. Ballistics made her story impossible, and Marcus's phone confirmed everything he had told others. He was ready for divorce, ready to move on, ready to rebuild a life beyond the arguing. There was no mystery, no confusion, no possibility that this was anything other than a deliberate act. When the case reached court, Carly appeared remorseful. She cried often, she apologized. She didn't deny the emotional chaos inside the marriage. Her attorney argued she acted in a moment of jealous rage, that it was an emotional break, not a calculated killing. They discussed the abusive dynamic, the nonstop arguments, the fear, the instability. But the facts stayed firm. Marcus was asleep. He wasn't a threat. He wasn't violent. He wasn't attacking her. He was simply trying to leave a broken marriage. His family attended every hearing. His mother and sister spoke with quiet heartbreak, asking the judge to give the maximum sentence possible. They explained who Marcus was: a loving man, a dedicated father figure, someone whose life ended before he ever had the chance to begin again. Carly's preacher spoke on her behalf, asking for leniency and treatment. But even that request couldn't outweigh the truth of what happened in that bedroom. Carly accepted an offered plea for voluntary manslaughter, maintaining that she didn't intend to kill him, but acknowledging the evidence would likely convict her. The judge reviewed the facts carefully and imposed the full 15-year sentence allowed under the plea, denying any alternative or reduced sentencing options. It was the maximum she could receive. Carly was taken into custody immediately. No chance to go home. No last moment of freedom. Just the quiet walk from the courtroom to the transport vehicle that would take her into the prison system. Her initial conviction was later overturned on technical grounds, but after years of legal back and forth, she accepted another plea in 2023 and received the same 15-year sentence. She remains in a state prison at a medium security level. No reported incidents, no misconduct. Just the daily routine of someone living with the irreversible choice she made. Marcus Alvafagans is remembered by his family as a man who loved deeply, who tried to stay, who wanted a peaceful future, and who never got the chance to start over. Justice can't bring him back, but it ensures the truth of his final night is not lost. Case 5. Amanda Belcher, 2018, Kanawha County. In the small rural stretch of Alum Creek, the Belcher home was known for arguments that could be heard from the road. Amanda Belcher and her husband, James Jimmy Belcher, lived with their children in a trailer on Ballard Road, and the tension inside that home had been building for years. Their fights were loud, sharp, and frequent. Two people who loved each other but couldn't speak without raising their voices. It wasn't a peaceful marriage, it wasn't a safe one, and neighbors knew the home carried more stress than happiness. Amanda was 35. To the outside world, she looked like a normal rural mother, barely getting by, taking care of the house, keeping routines moving. But behind closed doors, her temper could rise fast and burn even faster. Every argument became personal. Every disagreement became a battle she felt she needed to win. Jimmy was 45. He had a reputation for being argumentative, but not physically violent. Friends said he talked loud, but kept his hands to himself. He was a father trying to keep the family afloat despite the chaos around him. He hoped for stability even when it felt impossible. Their home wasn't calm, but he believed things could get better. Love can survive many hardships, but anger can destroy peace before anyone realizes how far it has gone. Their marriage wasn't new. They had been together for years, raising their children and trying to hold the home together. But the cracks kept spreading. Arguments erupted over basic things: household chores, responsibilities, daily stress. Both of them pushed each other's buttons. Both of them yelled. Police had been called multiple times for domestic disputes. The children had seen more than they should have. Nothing changed. Nothing improved. Amanda claimed Jimmy hit her in the past. The children echoed some of those claims. But on the night that mattered most, there were no signs of any physical fight. Only the sharp edge of words thrown back and forth until something inside Amanda broke. May 20th, 2018, started like any other evening. The arguments came and went. But around 6:50 p.m., something shifted in the small kitchen of their trailer. Voices rose again. The tension snapped. Jimmy said something that pushed Amanda too far, something she later repeated during her confession. In her words, he wouldn't shut up. What happened next ended everything. In the kitchen, with her children nearby, Amanda grabbed a butcher knife. There was no wrestling, no defense, no signs of a physical struggle. It happened fast. She stepped forward and plunged the knife into Jimmy's neck, cutting deep enough to sever his carotid artery. The force of the strike left no chance for survival. Blood sprayed across the small kitchen. Jimmy collapsed within seconds, losing consciousness as the children screamed and ran out of the trailer for help. Neighbors heard the chaos and called for assistance before they even understood what had happened. Jimmy died within minutes, long before paramedics could arrive. Amanda called 911 multiple times, crying, confused, claiming she acted in self-defense. She said he had hit her. She said he broke the phone. But officers arriving at the scene found no bruises, no marks, no overturned furniture, nothing to show he laid a hand on her that night. The only violence was the wound she inflicted. The contradictions between her confession and the physical evidence stood out immediately. She admitted she snapped. She admitted the argument triggered her anger. And though she tried to paint the moment as self-defense, the wounds, the angle, and the spotless condition of her body told a different story. Detectives didn't need days to piece it together. Her confession came fast. The children confirmed shouting, but no physical fight. And the single deep knife wound revealed intent, driven by rage, not fear. When the case reached court, Amanda didn't fight the charges. On the very morning the trial was set to begin, she changed her plea to guilty. She admitted to voluntary manslaughter, accepting responsibility for killing her husband. The judge listened quietly to both sides. He heard about the years of arguing. He heard about the children's statements. He heard the 911 calls where Amanda begged for help and insisted Jimmy had struck her. But in the end, the judge made his position clear. This wasn't self-defense. This wasn't an accident. This was rage. He gave her the maximum sentence for voluntary manslaughter, 15 years. In court, the judge said, "No one wins." And he was right. A father was gone, a mother was sent to prison, and the children who grew up in a loud, unstable home now had neither parent present. Jimmy's family suffered deeply. They spoke about the pain, the loss, and the memory of a man who tried to keep the house together, even when the walls shook from arguments. Local news covered the tragedy not for shock value, but because it showed you how years of conflict, unresolved anger, and emotional chaos can end in a moment of violence. Amanda is now serving her sentence in a West Virginia state facility at a medium security level. She hasn't caused trouble behind bars. She hasn't appealed. She went through evaluations before trial, and nothing new has been reported about her mental state since. Her life changed the moment she picked up that knife. Jimmy's life ended the moment it struck, and their children will carry the memory of that night forever. Justice can't undo what happened in that kitchen, but it ensures the truth of that evening will not be rewritten. Case 6. Jennifer Lynn Villa, 2017, Cabell County. Some marriages fracture slowly, breaking down through years of distrust, anger, and emotional strain. Others collapse in sudden, violent moments that expose every truth both partners tried to hide. For Jennifer Lynn Villa and her husband, Thomas Villa, their long-term marriage had reached a place where normal communication no longer existed. Their home on the 900 block of 28th Street in Huntington had become a place of tension, confusion, and bizarre attempts to salvage intimacy that only pushed them deeper into danger. Jennifer was 48. She lived a quiet life to anyone looking from the outside, just another woman in a small Huntington apartment, keeping mostly to herself. She and Thomas rarely interacted with neighbors. They didn't host gatherings, didn't socialize, didn't reveal much about their personal lives. But behind those closed doors was a marriage full of conflict, emotional volatility, and a history of violence that never reached the public until it was too late. While Jennifer told people they enjoyed rough, intimate play, records painted a different picture of her behavior. She wasn't the passive partner she portrayed herself to be. She was often the aggressor, both emotionally and physically. At one point before the killing, police had documented an incident where she tried to run Thomas over with a car. Neighbors later said they heard arguments where Jennifer was the dominant, forceful voice long before the ultimate tragedy occurred. Thomas, on the other hand, was 49, a gentle person by nature, trusting and soft-spoken. Investigators described him as nonviolent. Friends said he was a man who remained committed to the marriage even when their problems overwhelmed him. He tried to keep the home functioning, hoping the relationship could improve. He believed the role-play games they introduced, ninja or kung fu movie foreplay, were just another attempt to reconnect as their marriage deteriorated. He didn't realize he was placing himself in danger. Love can survive many storms, but a person who refuses to walk away from an unsafe home may end up suffering far more than they ever imagined. Their marriage had been strained for years. Small issues grew into major battles. Communication broke down. The intensity of their arguments escalated. And instead of seeking help or stepping back, they began leaning into violent role play as a way to fix their intimacy. But the games were not equal. They mirrored the imbalance in the marriage itself. Jennifer in control, Thomas trusting her far more than she deserved. Then came the financial motive. Weeks before Thomas died, Jennifer significantly increased his life insurance policy. Though exact numbers varied across reports, prosecutors emphasized the timing. She raised the policy shortly before the killing, then attempted to collect on it only 4 days after his death. It was a detail that would return to haunt her at trial. Saturday, November 4th, 2017 began like any other day. But around 8:01 p.m., inside their dimly lit bedroom, everything shattered. Jennifer and Thomas were engaged in one of their ninja role-play sessions. Thomas believed it was consensual. He believed he was safe. But at some point in the middle of the play, Jennifer reached for a 14-inch decorative dagger, a large, sharp blade, shaped like a fantasy weapon but capable of real harm. With Thomas facing away, she drove the dagger into his back. The blade plunged 7 inches deep, piercing his lung and heart. There was no way this happened from a slip. No way it happened in accident. The force required to push the blade that far into a human body was deliberate, far beyond the light contact one might expect in any kind of playful scenario. Thomas collapsed immediately. He gasped for air, struggling to breathe as blood filled his chest cavity. Investigators later said he died within minutes, unable to speak, unable to call for help, unable to understand how a moment that was supposed to be intimate turned into his final moments. Jennifer picked up the phone and dialed 911. Her voice was strangely calm. She told the dispatcher it was horseplay gone wrong. She said it was an accident. She said Thomas fell on the weapon. But that was only the first version of her story. When officers and medics arrived, Jennifer began cycling through a series of conflicting explanations. First, she said he slipped on water and fell onto a screwdriver. Then she said he fell onto a letter opener. Then she said he slipped onto the dagger. Finally, she shifted to the accidental stabbing during a ninja kung fu sex role-play story. None of the stories matched the forensic evidence. The wound angle was wrong for a fall. The depth was wrong for an accident. The force required was far too strong for mere stumbling. And the insurance claim she filed just 4 days later raised red flags immediately. Investigators spoke to neighbors who confirmed Jennifer's long-term aggression. They reviewed police records that supported the same pattern. And the medical examiner made it clear that the killing was not a mishap. It was a deliberate, forceful thrust. Her stories unraveled faster than she could create new ones. She was charged with first-degree murder. When the case reached the courtroom, Jennifer cried throughout nearly every appearance. She clung to the narrative that she never meant for Thomas to die. She told the judge he wasn't supposed to get stabbed. But the evidence didn't support innocence. The prosecution highlighted the increased insurance policy, the quick claim, the contradictory explanations, and the years of aggressive behavior. In July 2019, Jennifer accepted a plea deal, voluntary manslaughter. She avoided a life sentence but faced the harshest penalty allowed under the statute. The judge issued the maximum, 15 years. He made it clear that the wound, the circumstances, and the timing left no room for mercy. Jennifer was ordered into custody, receiving credit only for the time she had already served. Media outlets across the country picked up the case, labeling it as a sex game gone wrong and a ninja dagger killing. For many, it was a shocking story. For investigators and those close to Thomas, it was the tragic end of a marriage marked by fear, dominance, and a man who stayed far longer than he should have. Today, Jennifer Lynn Villa remains incarcerated at Lakin Correctional Center in West Columbia, West Virginia. She has caused no reported issues behind bars. No appeals have succeeded. Every reconsideration attempt has been denied. Thomas Villa is remembered as a loving, trusting man who believed he was safe with the person he shared his life with. His final moments reflect a truth many victims of long-term emotional manipulation face. Danger often comes not from strangers, but from the people they believe they can trust. Justice cannot bring him back, but it ensures his story does not disappear behind the false narrative of an accident. Case 7. Kimberly Swan, 2020, Harrison County. Some marriages fade quietly, others grind down year after year, kept alive only by habit and shared history. For Kimberly Swan and her husband, Jerry Lee Swan, 3 decades of marriage had hardened into something neither of them recognized anymore. Their home sat along a rural patch of Wallace, West Virginia, a place where neighbors lived far apart and privacy wasn't hard to maintain. In that isolation, the tension inside their marriage grew without anyone truly seeing it. Kimberly was 57. She had lived in that home for most of her adult life, carrying the name Miller, before she married Jerry back in January 1990. To the community, she looked like a long-married homemaker, a woman settled comfortably into the routine of rural life. She had the stability people associate with a partner of 30 years. She seemed calm, predictable, steady. But beneath that surface was a different reality. Kimberly held on to years of frustration and resentment. Investigators later learned she had recorded verbal threats. She had a pent-up rage that smoldered long before anyone outside the home ever heard about it. One of the most chilling pieces of evidence, a cell phone video from 2019, captured her threatening to kill her husband long before she ever pulled the trigger. Jerry Lee Swan was 48, a hard-working welder who spent his days working with torches and metal. Friends said he talked loud, argued often, but wasn't violent. He was a grandfather, a man who tried to keep his marriage together, even as the years wore heavily on both of them. People in Wallace knew him as someone who showed up, put in the work, and kept going. He wanted a peaceful home, even when the arguments with Kimberly made that dream feel far out of reach. He was a rural man through and through, steady, loyal, and worn down by the constant bickering that filled their house. Love can last decades, but when bitterness takes root, even 30 years of history can feel like a cage. Their marriage had cracks long before 2020. They fought over chores. They fought over money. Kimberly accused Jerry of cheating, even though no evidence ever supported it. The arguments escalated. The isolation of rural life only intensified the pressure. They had no outside help, no counseling, no intervention. They lived in their own bubble of stress. Despite the fighting, there were no major police reports. Nothing official to mark how troubled their marriage had become. But behind closed doors, Jerry lived with the kind of stress that wears a person down over time, and Kimberly carried an anger neither of them had the tools to manage. By early 2020, that anger had reached a breaking point. March 4th, 2020 began like many of their days. Chores, small tasks, the quiet rhythm of rural living. But at some point during the day, an argument started inside the home. No one knows the exact words exchanged. No one knows the final trigger. But something inside Kimberly snapped. In the middle of that argument, she picked up a .38 caliber Cobra revolver and shot Jerry in the chest. It was a close contact wound. No hesitation, no warning shot, no sign of any defensive struggle. Jerry died immediately. What Kimberly did next turned a tragedy into a full cover-up. Instead of calling 911 to report a shooting, she staged the scene to look like an accident. She called for help, claiming Jerry had been electrocuted while welding. She told the dispatcher he was hurt by equipment. She cried, she panicked, she tried to make the lie believable. But the lie fell apart as soon as authorities entered the home. Jerry had no burns, no electrical marks, no signs of an accident. He had a gunshot wound to the chest, clear, unmistakable, and impossible to mistake for electrocution. Forensic testing confirmed gunshot residue. The autopsy confirmed a single .38 bullet. And the scene showed staging rather than chaos. As detectives looked deeper, they found the most damaging evidence: the 2019 cell phone video where Kimberly threatened to kill Jerry. It showed a long-term pattern of emotional aggression, not a sudden accident. It revealed intent. It revealed a history she had worked hard to hide. Her story couldn't survive against the truth. When the case went to court, Kimberly cried and appeared remorseful. Her defense claimed she snapped in the heat of passion, a sudden emotional overload after years of strain. But the prosecution pointed to the threat video as proof that the killing didn't happen in a single moment. It was part of a long buildup of resentment. And when the judge watched that video, Kimberly clearly stating she would kill her husband, the case shifted sharply. Kimberly accepted a plea deal for second-degree murder. Even with the plea, she faced the highest penalty available under West Virginia law for that charge. The judge sentenced her to 40 years, the maximum. Her earliest chance for parole comes after 10 years. But the sentence itself carries the weight of a lifetime. In the courtroom, she didn't argue. She didn't push back. She accepted the outcome. Her tears didn't change the facts. Her story couldn't erase the threat she recorded. Her marriage of 30 years ended in a single gunshot, and the life she built in that rural home ended with a prison sentence. Jerry's family and community mourned a man who tried to hold a difficult marriage together. They remembered him as a hard-working welder, a father, a grandfather, and someone who deserved far more than the ending he received. Today, Kimberly is incarcerated at Lakin Correctional Center, West Virginia's primary women's prison. She has kept a quiet profile behind bars. No major incidents have been reported. Court records list her as remorseful. But remorse cannot change the truth of what happened that March afternoon. Her story stands as a reminder that emotional tension, left ignored for years, can lead to irreversible tragedy. Jerry Lee Swan's death echoed through the Wallace community, touching everyone who knew him and leaving behind a family still grappling with the loss of a man who never raised a hand, but paid the ultimate price for the conflicts inside his home. Justice brought answers, but it could not bring him back. Case 8. Mary Faye Craft, 1988, Grant County. By 1988, Mary Faye Craft had lived a life full of weddings, funerals, and insurance claims. Far more than anyone around her realized at first. She was charming, calm, soft-spoken, the kind of woman who smiled politely, spoke gently, and made people believe she was nothing more than an unlucky widow. But behind the sweet exterior was a long trail of suspicious losses, each one tied to money, each one ending with her as the beneficiary. When she met retired Air Force Major General Robert E. Bob Sadler, she presented herself as a loving fifth wife, ready to settle into a peaceful marriage. Bob was 62, playful, kind, respected by everyone who had ever served with him. Friends still called him High School Bob, a nickname from the days before medals and rank. He carried himself with honor and warmth, even after losing his first wife to cancer. After a lifetime of service, he wanted something simple: companionship, quiet evenings, and a home where he felt loved. He had no idea the woman he met through a personal ad in the Washingtonian magazine came with a history of husbands who died under strange circumstances. He had no idea she had already collected multiple six-figure payouts from their deaths. He had no idea he was walking straight into the life of someone investigators later described as cold and manipulative. They married on July 26, 1986. For a short time, things looked fine. They traveled, spent time together, and tried to build a life. But the honeymoon phase faded quickly. Mary grew irritable, restless. She made comments about inheritance. She brought up insurance often enough that the Sadler family took notice. They were uneasy from the start. The pattern was too obvious, the timing too convenient, and Mary's smile never seemed to reach her eyes. Love can hold a marriage together, but greed always pulls the curtain back. Over the months that followed, the cracks widened. Mary was unhappy. She wanted out. A friend later signed an affidavit saying Mary openly admitted she didn't want to stay married to Bob, but divorce would leave her empty-handed, and she wasn't interested in walking away without a payout. So she did what she had done before. She put a plan in place. She began pushing for an insurance policy, one worth around $400,000 to $410,000. If Bob died in an accident, that amount would double, and Mary made sure she was the beneficiary. Bob had the income. She had the debts. Her past marriages had all ended under a shadow, and now she saw her new husband as the answer to her financial problems. By early 1988, whatever warmth existed between them was gone. Mary complained about the marriage often. Bob's family later said he seemed tired, confused by the sudden coldness, but still hopeful things might improve. He had no idea the insurance policy she fought for would soon become the key to what happened next. On April 9, 1988, Mary and Bob drove to her 187-acre farm near Sher, an isolated stretch of land surrounded by trees and quiet fields. It was the kind of place where no neighbors would hear a thing. No witnesses, no unexpected visitors. Somewhere on that property, with no one else around, a gun fired. The weapon was Bob's own service revolver. The shot was close range, straight to his head. The kind of wound that investigators later said could not have been self-inflicted and could not have happened by accident. The trajectory was wrong. The angle was wrong. The force was wrong. There was no way Bob pulled the trigger himself. Mary claimed that they had been playing, scuffling, or cleaning the gun. She changed the details depending on who she told, but one thing never changed. She didn't call 911. Instead, she picked up the phone and called her son. When he answered, she didn't offer a story, she didn't break down, she didn't say it was an accident. She said two words that would follow her forever. "I did it." She added, "I shot him." That confession would later become one of the most important parts of the entire case. But in that moment, Mary believed she could talk her way out of everything. Once investigators arrived, she switched back to the accident story. She said the gun just went off while they were fooling around. She cried. She trembled. She leaned into the role she had played for years, the soft, sweet widow, always caught in another tragedy. She didn't expect the Sadler family to fight back. Bob's children demanded answers. They hired private investigators. They pushed authorities to re-examine every detail. Their father was a decorated Major General. He had survived Vietnam, overseas missions, and decades of service. They refused to believe he had died from some careless slip with his firearm. Forensic experts reviewed the evidence, and it didn't take long to confirm what the family already knew. This was homicide. The bullet path was wrong for an accident. The distance was wrong for a struggle. The angle was wrong for self-infliction. Nothing about Mary's story matched reality, and when investigators looked closer, they found something else. Evidence from her previous marriages, including insurance payouts and a suspicious house fire tied to yet another husband. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Everywhere Mary went, tragedy followed, and so did money. By October 1988, Mary stood trial in Grant County Circuit Court. She walked into the courtroom dressed carefully, speaking softly, crying on cue, presenting herself as a grieving widow caught in a nightmare she didn't create. Her defense argued it was a tragic accident. She repeated the same story over and over. She cried through her testimony, wiping her face, speaking softly to gain sympathy. Bob's family watched in heartbreak. The prosecution highlighted the history. The 3 previous husbands who died, the insurance money she collected, the affidavit about her wanting out of the marriage, the large policy on Bob's life, and the damning words she said to her son. Her son took the stand and repeated it. "My mother told me I did it. I shot him." It was the most powerful moment in the entire trial. But trials don't always end with the truth winning. On October 31st, 1988, the jury delivered a decision that stunned the Sadler family. Not guilty. The moment she heard it, Mary didn't cry softly or bow her head. She jumped up in the courtroom and shouted, "Praise the Lord!" Bob's children sat in disbelief. She walked out of that courthouse free, just as she had walked away from every other suspicious death in her past. But the Sadler family wasn't done. They filed a wrongful death lawsuit, determined to seek justice in the only way left. After months of digging, presenting evidence, and refusing to give up, they reached a settlement. Mary surrendered approximately $360,000, $450,000 from the insurance payout and gave up all rights to Bob's burial plot at Arlington National Cemetery. She never again laid claim to his memory. After her acquittal, Mary disappeared from public attention. Records show she lived quietly in Florida into the 2000s, collecting a military widow's pension and avoiding the spotlight that once followed her. She was never charged again, never held accountable in criminal court, never forced to answer for the trail of suspicious deaths behind her. She remains one of America's most infamous acquitted Black Widow cases, free, unpunished, and remembered not for grief, but for the men whose lives ended after crossing her path. Bob Sadler deserved a peaceful retirement. Instead, his trust placed him in the hands of someone who valued money more than marriage. Justice didn't arrive in a courtroom, but it did arrive through a family who refused to stay silent. In the end, every one of these cases reminds us of a simple truth. Evil doesn't always walk in from the outside. Sometimes it grows in the very places meant to protect us. Our homes, our marriages, our promises. These men trusted the women they built their futures with. They shared meals, laughter, families, and they never imagined those same hands would bring their lives to an end. It's a kind of betrayal that cuts deeper than words can reach. But justice did what it could. Some of these wives will spend the rest of their lives behind concrete and steel. Others escaped prison but not accountability, because truth has a way of rising, even when lies try to bury it. If there's one thing we can take from their stories, it's this: love should never hurt, fear should never be normal, and peace should never depend on walking on eggshells. When a home no longer feels safe, stepping away is not weakness, it is wisdom. And for the victims whose voices were stolen, we remember them. We speak their names. We honor their lives, because their stories deserve more than silence. Thank you for watching, and may you stay safe, stay aware, and stay close to the people who bring you peace, not pain. God bless, and I'll see you in the next episode.